Ghosh, who tracks health stories for us at the print.
Right.
We'll take some questions from viewers, but before we begin with that, we will I have some of my own questions that I want to pose to Mr. Mishra. So to begin with, my first question is that at the beginning of the pandemic, we prepared so many isolation centers, right? And we saw where our hotels and our train compartments were being turned into isolation beds. So why were they disbanded, and wouldn't such centers help reduce transmission within homes and also help streamline access to hospitals?
See, many of them would actually have been disbanded due to purely administrative reasons of lying idle. For train coaches, for example, they anyway served a very limited purpose. So if they were disbanded, you were not getting really down with the numbers of available bed. In fact, to answer you, slowly what was happening was that we got into a mode where we thought at an appropriate time we will be able to reconvert the facility into a COVID facility. Actually, it doesn't happen that fast. And that has been our experience. But we could certainly have continued with some, given the fact that at some point of time, somewhere in the globe, it was raging. So we knew it might be coming back to us. But that is not the more serious question. I think the intent of what you are also asking is an issue of home isolation versus isolation centers. I am not a medical expert, but my own view is that one of the critical elements in COVID has been administration's ability to create an ease for the person who is suffering and does not immediately need intense medical attention, which we normally say asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic or whatever. So I would, for one, be a votary for home isolation with all precautions. And there are many people who are arguing that when you are at home, you really don't follow the guidelines. It's difficult to believe that I would not like to save my own life unless somebody else puts me in a camp and saves my life. If that is the truth, then perhaps nobody can do anything.
Right. In fact, like with a lot of the guidelines that have changed in this way, we do see that, the health ministry seems to put more faith in the public that they will be able to, look at to sort of manage a lot of things by themselves. I would like to come to you, Dr. Suranjit Chatterjee, next. Are we seeing a surge in hospitalizations? And, how does the current situation compare to what we saw, in the last wave, where by this, considering the number of infections that we are seeing on a daily basis, how does it compare?
See, till now, the number of admissions to our hospital or to most of the hospitals is actually minuscule as compared to what happened during the Delta wave. Luckily, till now, the patients are less sick. The lung involvement is much, much less than before. And they're not coming with low oxygen. Even the other parameters are reasonably stable as compared to the Delta wave. So luckily, till now, the hospital admissions are very less. But I still fear, and we need to keep our fingers crossed, because this time the denominator is going to be very high. By that I mean that the number of patients who would get affected is very high. And even if a fraction of the patient who have comorbidities or who are in the vulnerable age group, they become sick, will need hospitalization. And that is what we are seeing in the world, that even the US hospitalizations have increased, the UK hospitalizations were very high. So we need to keep our fingers crossed. We need to be prepared for it, because even if it is a milder disease, till now, the number of cases which might become sick, even if it is a fraction of the total number, can basically affect the healthcare system.
Right. So that's what I think has been reiterated, that even though this infection, this Omicron variant is showing very, it has a reduced severity, but we cannot take risks with this virus, as we have seen in the past waves as well. Coming to you, Avantika, we have had a very interesting health briefing today. And we will talk about some of what was covered at the briefing in a bit. But first, can you give us a sense of why it is that the isolation period was reduced? Why did we go from 14 days to 7 days?
Okay, so I will try to show this graphic. I'm not very sure whether you can see it. If you can't, then I'll just go without it. Can you see this? Right.
Yeah.
You see that shaded area, just covering the spike. There's a shaded area that is actually day 0 to day 8. Actually, day 2 to day 8, not 0. Day 2 to day 8, and that is the infectious period. This graph actually shows which test works at which point of time. So there's a small window for lateral flow tests. But there's a much longer window for RT-PCR, which, as we know from our very old now South Korea experience of 2020, that RT-PCR can actually go on detecting fragments of the virus in the body, remnants of the virus, even after it has died for maybe weeks afterwards. So there's a very long red line on top. That's the RT-PCR. And then there is the short green line of the lateral flow tests. Now, to some extent, the lateral flow test and the infectious period, they actually coincide to some extent, not exactly. And this is the rationale for reducing the home isolation period to 7 days, because as it is, and this is what we were told in the briefing, Dr. Chatterjee would be able to tell us better, as it is the period during which the person is requiring medical attention or is showing symptoms is shorter than earlier, and also the infectivity period is shorter. So the 7-day isolation is usually enough for people to start going out, obviously with some amount of restrictions, some masking. And I mean, right now, this is the time for everybody to mask up, not just a patient or a recovered patient.
Right. We do have some questions coming in. So Vamshi Krishna, he's asking that how will the decreased testing guidelines of ICMR impact the wave? Mr. Mishra, would you like to take this?
The decreased testing guidelines should really not be seen as a decreased testing. It should be seen as testing when needed. What we are doing when we have evidence to say that beyond a particular period, 7 days, as Avantika was saying, or earlier 14 days as we had, beyond that, you are not infectious. What is the point of retesting before you are actually declared fit? It's not a fitness certificate. So there are people, I was reading somewhere, very interesting thing, that there are some people who are saying that is it because government cannot test enough? Let me tell you, we are way past that phase when you could say that government cannot test enough or the private sector cannot test enough. We have enough testing capability. But when we started with the virus, you would remember a refrain from WHO saying test, test, test.
Yes.
I think we need not say that any longer. If you are moving towards an endemic situation, testing is only a tool to help you. Now, let me give you a very live example for the audience. I am positive, no symptoms. I have tested myself and seen that I am positive. I isolate for a particular period. I am non-infective after that. I know that I don't have any symptoms. I don't need to be treated. Why should I be kept inside a room for 14 days or 15 days? Only because I need to get retested. So I think reduction in some of the tests is appropriate. And to be very honest, I was quite expecting it. Given the world experience, I was quite expecting it.
Right. Sir, Dr. Chatterjee, if you would take this next question. We have Shahrukh Mohammed asking, will we need another set of vaccines as new variants occur? Also, will boosters become compulsory at the end? I think by compulsory, he means, will everyone need to take it eventually?
See, our experience with influenza shows that every year you have to take a vaccine. And with corona or COVID infection, what we are seeing is that obviously there are different variants, different conversions that are happening. And we might land up, when it becomes endemic, we might land up with a need to take a vaccine maybe every 6 months or every year. That's what is important. But even Pfizer has commented that they are going to change the vaccine which will suit the Omicron variant. That is what happens. So whenever there are newer variants, whenever there are newer mutations happening, the vaccine has to be actually tweaked to fit into the newer variants and to take care of the newer variants. So we might land up, booster doses again and again may not be helpful, but we might require a regular vaccination schedule later on once it becomes endemic to take care of this infection. So that is still open. We'll see in the next couple of months or the next couple of in the next 1 or 2 years as to what happens. But it could be a possibility that we might have to end up taking a vaccine every 6 months or 1 year to prevent ourselves from a COVID infection.
Which is not an unprecedented, development. We already have such vaccines for influenza as well, and anyway, I mean, every child gets vaccinated with a series of diseases which we don't see, as frequently anymore. So vaccinations are already part of our lives, and it is what is increasing our life expectancy. So another question I have for. Let's go to Abantika. Actually, I do want to address what we just heard at the briefing today, where once again, just a few weeks back, I think about 2 weeks back, Balram Bhargav, ICMR GG, he talked about Molnupiravir having some safety issues, and but on the same platform, we also have we have the talk of Ayush protocol once again being used as prophylaxis. So is there any data to support the use of Ayush products?
So not just 2 weeks back, Dr. Bhargav today made actually a far more detailed, not a presentation, but he listed out all the objections that the expert group had to Molnupiravir, all the concerns that they had. And we also had the Ministry of Ayush sharing a long list of drugs that they claim. So it's very interesting. The words that were used is COVID patients are becoming better to a significant extent. We have done this study and it shows that this is working. Very qualitative statements. If you would allow me to say so, I would say unscientific statements, because when I asked about efficacy data for these, for both treatment and prophylaxis, so, for example, there is this homeopathy drug called Arsenicum album. That was a part of the first, yes, sir, that was a part of the first Ayush protocol. So when I asked about the efficacy data, I was told that about the number of papers that the Ayush Ministry has got peer reviewed. Efficacy is a number, I mean, from what I understand. Yes, sorry, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
No, please carry on.
Oh, I thought you wanted to say something, sir.
No, I will come in after you finish.
No, sir, I'm done. So basically, there is no efficacy data, at least none that was shared with us. And, in these last 2 years, if there's one thing we have learned is to ask these questions. So yeah, and it was just a very empirical prescription of all these drugs and how much everything was given. What is the number of days you need to have it? What is the dose you need to have? Everything except what is the scientific evidence. Maybe it exists. I don't know. I haven't looked it up, but it was not shared today.
No, the only thing that I wanted to add, and I think this is very effective as a tool of communication, is no matter what you say, whether you're advocating a homeopathy medicine or you're advocating something else in allopathy, whatever, put the data in public domain, let people take a call. Every time we come ahead to share some knowledge which is a little different from the earlier one, maybe a very well acquired knowledge. But for me as a person, I would feel far more confident if I had data in public domain, or at least some kind of a indication to to the data that we have, to feel confident. That's about all. I'm neither saying it's untrue or true or whatever, because I don't know. But I want to take an informed decision. I have a right to take an informed decision.
Right.
So we don't even have data. We don't even have data on, we were just told today we don't have data on breakthrough infections. We don't know how much vaccines are reducing hospitalization or reducing infection in India. There was a study that was shared from New York on infections and hospitalizations reducing on vaccines. But when we asked specifically again about data from India, we were told the data is being collected.
Right. And in fact, we did have like a study from AIIMS doctors, but, the data that we saw was about Covaxin, but it got published right now, and the data was from last year. So I think that delay is also something that, it really harms how the public looks at the efficacy of vaccines or understands why vaccines are helping out. It took a long time for the message that vaccines are not disease preventing but disease modifying to actually get to the public. Dr. Chatterjee, I also want to, there was this sentence that Dr. Bhargav today mentioned when he was talking about molnupiravir, that the benefits outweigh, the risks outweigh the benefits. So, when it comes to products that are so-called Ayurvedic, are they, prescribed or whatever? Are they recommended in a way, in this way, just because they are perceived to not have side effects?
See, we actually, unfortunately, don't have much of, as Avantika was saying, that we don't have much of data, what is available with us. And that is why we tend not to believe it. Although I'm not totally against all these preparation, neither am I totally against homeopathy or Ayurveda. But if it would have been data, if it would have been data supported, we would have really gone by it. So we really don't know what are the side effects of these, although most of the natural products that they use would not have side effects. How much beneficial they are, we really don't know. And that is why the biggest example was when Covaxin was launched without data, people were not willing to take a wonderful vaccine otherwise. The platform of making that vaccine is beautiful, is wonderful. But we didn't have data, and there were so many questions asked about this vaccine. So the same thing holds true with Ayurveda and homeopathy. If you don't support it with data to the learned people these days, we don't know what are the side effects, how much dosage to be taken. Do we have any proof that this dosage works? This is all an empirical sort of a thing. So once you come out with data, I think then this alternative sciences can be better. I'm not arguing at any point that these medications may not be of use, but till the time we don't have data, we cannot be recommending it as the modality of treatment for all these diseases.
Right. I think we also need to, give due respect to everyone. Everyone, people in India are very smart and they know what to choose for themselves, and that is why they need this data out there. Mr. Mishra, let's now say that a person has tested positive for COVID using a home test. So at what point should they get themselves hospitalized?
But before I answer this one, if you'll allow, just to carry on with the previous discussion, just half a minute on that. I find this interesting because unless you put science and data at the center, everybody seems so knowledgeable that they try and tell the entire country what to eat and what not to eat, or how to live and how not to live. To prevent those multiple universities from coming up, we need to have scientific real-time data to the extent that we can. And we don't have to go very far. Just focus a little back. Remember the plasma, and you'll get all the answers. Now, coming back to your, when does one need hospitalization? Dr. Chatterjee would be able to medically better answer this, but from an administrative point of view, my own take is that a person should come to government only when he thinks he needs that help. asymptomatic patients, mildly symptomatic patients who can ideally isolate at home, who are capable of getting enough home care, should stay away. But what I would strongly advocate is that even if there is a small iota of doubt in your mind about how you are feeling or how you are moving in the medical direction, seek medical help. I or you do not know how to treat ourselves and should not treat ourselves. The sooner we seek medical help, the better it is. And whether to admit in a hospital or not, the doctor knows best.
Right. Taking forward your question about, how we don't really know how to treat ourselves exactly. So, Dr. Chatterjee, what are some of the medicines that a person can, safely take at home to alleviate their symptoms? And what are the medicines that a patient absolutely should not take without medical supervision?
See, I'm very clear. I'm approaching patients with COVID. There's a new infection and a new disease. And even doctors really don't know that well how to treat it. I would expect that once you have been suspected or diagnosed to have COVID, you should definitely be in consultation with your local physician or your pediatrician. That is mandatory for me, because how this disease behaves in what group of people, what subgroup is going to behave abnormally, how he is going to react to different medications, you need to be under supervision of a doctor. Now, like over-the-counter drugs, if you have sometimes like fever, you can take paracetamol, which is not very harmful. But quite a few times, the fever is not coming down with paracetamol when we are using something like a mefenamic acid, or we are using something like a naproxen. But it has its own side effects. It can cause ulcers, it can damage your kidneys, it can cause bleeding, it can cause a precipitation of asthma. So that's why I say that you need to be under guidance of a local physician. Even a simple fever-reducing medication or a pain-reducing medication can have alarming side effects. And if you go into antibiotics, most of the people will start using antibiotics, which actually have no role in the treatment of COVID. The thing this time is that the medications actually, even after 2 years, and with this newer strain, the medications which are available with us are very few still. And the decision has to be taken in the first 3 to 5 days. If you have to treat a person, the decision actually has to be taken in the first 3 to 5 days. So especially vulnerable population, people more than 60 years of age, or who have comorbidities like diabetes, heart failure, asthma, bronchitis, they need to, maybe they would need an early medication, and a very controversial medication. Let me tell you, remdesivir, which was being used earlier at a later stage, has now come up with a new study. Use it at an early stage and it might have beneficial effects. So even if it's controversial, that decision has to be taken by your treating doctor. Something like molnupiravir, basically it has got, so I was very happy that so many side effects were counted by Dr. Balram Bhargava, because in India, unfortunately, once you have a drug, it is so misused that even the patients and the doctors both start using these drugs rampantly, the way steroids were used during the second wave. So I'm very happy that this was at least told to the people that these are the known side effects. Don't use this just over the counter. Use them under supervision of the doctors. And it was a lesson for the doctors as well as the patients. So now to me, not everybody is asking for that drug. Everybody's scared now to use that drug. Otherwise, the moment it was launched, I must have received within 5 hours, 10 patients calling me, can we use that drug? So I'm really happy that Balram Bhargava actually told the public and the doctors, including the doctors, let me tell you, that these are the things which you need to keep at the back of your mind. The other thing is all these monoclonal antibodies and everything. Now it has been found that with Omicron, because it has this immune escape phenomena, the monoclonal antibodies may not work. So actually you're left with very few medications. You can use this paracetamol safely. You can use an anti-allergic or a decongestant like fexofenadine or cetirizine if you have a runny nose, sneezing, blocked nose. You can use some antacid tablets if you're having a lot of bloating or nausea and all these things. This can be used, and a vitamin D preparation. If you have not taken a vitamin D preparation for the last couple of weeks, you can take a vitamin D preparation. But let me tell you, all this zinc and everything being very beneficial has not been backed up by studies. You can use something like a vitamin C, which has some role because it's an antioxidant. It can help you in your cold. It has been earlier used for reducing the cold. So maybe a paracetamol, a vitamin C, maybe an anti-allergic tablet, or maybe an antacid, if required, can be used over the counter. But I would still say that even if you're using these regular medications, be under supervision of your local physician or your pediatrician.
Right. There is a very interesting point that you brought up. So I think we are running out of time. So I'd like to wrap up by asking this last question to Abantika. How do you think, the communication around COVID treatment protocols and preparedness for patients, for the public in general, has sort of changed or evolved from what we saw in the last wave to what we are seeing this time?
So I think last time there was a lot of desperation. So anything that came up, it started being sort of touted as the next big thing. This is the cure-all. But I think over time, I mean, the experience that we have had, like Sir was mentioning about plasma. So we have actually seen that so many things that were part of the protocol had to be taken out. Right now, it's just we don't have plasma, we don't have hydroxychloroquine, which at one point of time, we actually literally fought the world on hydroxychloroquine, saying it works, and now we don't use it anymore. So all of these things have changed, and I think we are also a little more circumspect. I'm not an expert, so I don't know how dangerous really molnupiravir is, but with molnupiravir, at least I see a lot of circumspection happening, reviews happening before it being brought into the, at one point of time, we were even using ritonavir, lopinavir. I remember very well the Italian tourist in Rajasthan. That person was administered this and was supposed to have been cured. And now look at it. It failed the trial, Solidarity trial. It's off so many trials now because it doesn't work. So I think there's a bit of, we have sort of matured with experience, and the desperation because of the vaccine, the desperation to look for a cure is a little less. Also currently, I hope it stays that way, but currently we are seeing a lot less severe cases around us. That clamor of the second wave is not there, and I hope it stays that way. So I think, yeah, we are a little more rational in our communication, I would say, about medical remedies, except about Ayush.
All right. So, one question I got from a viewer, Samir Khare, was, who actually pointed out the same thing. We don't hear much about research on cure for COVID. I hope, Samir, that got, answered with Abantika's comments here. It's because we have a vaccine now, and it does seem to reduce, the amount of the number of severe cases and the death rate that we were seeing earlier. So there definitely are being, so his next question is, are there any other, COVID drugs that are being worked on? Abantika, do you want to just, go over some of them?
There are several others. There's Paxlovid, if I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yes.
So it's being used abroad. We are not using it yet. We haven't approved it yet. That is being used abroad. There are a lot of others which are in the works. But I think more importantly, this quest for drugs is actually, like we saw in the second wave, this clamor for drugs, that we need to have a cure. It caused so much complications, steroid overuse, and to my mind, mucormycosis was a far worse epidemic than COVID ever was. I mean, it was deadly. It killed so many people. So I think we need to sort of step back a bit, and instead of looking for these cures, really magic cures, we should sort of just take it one step at a time and go by medical advice, rather than going for our own. Because Dr. Chatterjee has gone. I mean, he was mentioning to me some time back that a lot of remdesivir use happened because families insisted. and doctors just had to give in. So that sort of a situation is highly avoidable.
I think the same thing happened with ivermectin as well, where I mean, at that time, families were desperate to, get some sort of a cure because it was quite a tragedy at that time. We did not have a cure, and a lot of people were not vaccinated. Mr. Mishra, any closing comments on our preparedness right now? Are we, it does seem like we're the mood is a little more positive than it was during the last wave. So, going forward, what would you tell people and health authorities as well?
Anna, ask the question about positivity to people who are actually COVID positive, and you'll get an answer from there. But the issue is, things appear to be much better this time. Of the lessons that we got from the first and the second wave, we seem to have learned some and insisted on not learning from the others. It's a relatively better phase. Hopefully, we'll go through it easier than last time. Because, the question that we were discussing about excessive drug use and unnecessary drug use, look at the country as a whole. Antibiotics, for example. Now, second line antibiotics are not working because of overuse and over-the-counter use. We need to have a restraint. It is the doctor who knows best. And one of the reasons why we do this is that we don't, as I initially said, put out every fact to the public for their knowledge. So they start deciding themselves. But coming back to the current phase, I don't think, and I may be wrong, that we need an overkill. We don't need to shut people unnecessarily behind doors. We need to pick up those who are refusing to comply with guidelines of masks, etc., and actually force it. I would say take them and isolate them somewhere. They are a threat to others. Let's be strict on that. But let us not restrict movement, cut down violations, and let people start. Initially you made a comment, and I'm a very strong believer in that the time has come to pass on the baton to the people for their own safety. You just need to be supportive.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mishra. Thank you, Abantika. And thank you to Dr. Chatterjee, who unfortunately dropped out at the last moment. But he did answer a lot of our questions. All of you did. And I do hope that, we were able to address some of the doubts, some of the queries that, are constantly coming up about COVID as everyone, struggles with this pandemic. We will once again be back with the Virus Decode episode. We are live every day at 6. We get a new set of experts to answer all of your questions. So don't forget to join in tomorrow as well. And do send in your questions so that we can have the right people answer them. Thank you once again and have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.